I recently took 100 days off of work and drove 30,000 kilometers for a road trip. Now it's time for the bills. We'll look into the total costs, break them down into specific categories, and see how this trip could have been done even more cheaply. So, how much did I ultimately spend? The short answer is about $100 per day for a total of $10,000. Of course, you could do a similar trip with half of the cost, but given the limited time I had before going back to work, I chose to maximize experience instead of minimizing costs. The true cost is also a bit lower than $10,000, and here's why. I didn't have to pay rent, parking, food, and entertainment back home for the whole trip. In a big city like Toronto, the cost of living alone would have been more than $10,000. I wasn't earning any income either, but will end up paying lower taxes on the other months of work because my annual income would be lower overall. All in all, by December 31st of this year, my savings account would have been $8,000 higher had I worked for the entire year instead of traveling for a third of it. Anyway, let's stick with the $10,000 figure and see how I spent it across 4 different categories: living, gas, food, and attractions. Living. Sleeping under a roof, or some resemblance of it, accounts for about 20% of the costs, which is $2,000 total, or roughly $20 per night. I spend most nights camping or with friends. 40 days were free as I camped on free land, stayed in friends' houses, or slept in the car. I lived in hotels and nicer Airbnbs for only 10 days, but they accounted for almost half of the living costs. It was an intentional choice to experience a variety of places to stay with some luxury and comfort, but definitely not necessary either. So, how could I have slept more cheaply? If we cut out all the hotels and Airbnbs, we'll bring down the cost down to an average of $10 per day. Go with another person, and now it's $5 per day. Plan ahead to stay on free land like Crown Land in Canada or BLM properties in the States, and sleeping is essentially free. Sites like freecampsites.net are also very helpful. It's also easier if you plan ahead to sleep in a car, as that opens up options like truck stops, pullouts in the wild, Walmart parking lots, and casinos. In some places like Alaska, you can legally sleep in your car anywhere, wherever you can safely park your car. Finally, consider backcountry camping in national parks instead of car camping, as they're usually free and rarely full. Gas. This is an easy one. It's about a Canadian dollar for every 10 kilometers, or a US dollar for every 10 miles. So it really just depends on how much you want to drive and stop by every day. If you have time, I would plan for a maximum of 200 miles or 300 kilometers per day. And keep in mind that's coming from someone who loves to drive. Even in Alaska, 300 miles or 500 kilometers felt like a significant amount, as I made stops to visit the area, hike, or simply just stare at ice. If you're looking at my gas numbers, keep in mind that they're overstated because my car requires premium gas and I don't drive in the most fuel-efficient way. But if you're not driving too much, gas is really only about $20 per day, or $10 if you're traveling with someone else. And of course, don't forget to change your engine oil as needed. Food. Granola bar only days, barbecue over the fire, instant noodles, oatmeal, king crabs, buffalo steak. I definitely had a varied diet, with an average of 1 restaurant, bar, or street food per day, a visit to the grocery store every 2 days, and a fish market every week. I spent a total of $30 per day, 20 of which solely on restaurants and bars. Since eating was part of the traveling experience, I definitely ended up spending more than the bare minimum. This cost could have easily been dropped to $10 to $15 per day if you skip restaurants and focus on inserting local food through grocery stores. Usually, I'll opt to try more local fruits, local beer, live seafood, prepared and seasoned meats based on local cuisine, and a bag of salad mix or other leaves. If food is just something to help with hunger, then take a look at this chart, which ranks food by the most calorie per dollar. If you're just eating ramen, you only need about $2 per day. Attractions. I spent a bit more than 10% of my expenses, or $1,000 in total, on attractions. The first thing I bought were the US and Canadian National Park annual passes, at $80 US per 2 adults and $60 Canadian for one. They're cheaper than 1 week's worth of entrance if you were to visit the park separately. I also spent $270 on the flight to Mount Logan, the highest peak of Canada, and landed on the ice field. and then another $220 to look at more ice at Glacier Bay National Park. The next two biggest expenditures were a beach buggy on Oregon sand dunes and a magical tour of the Warner Brothers studio. Just these 4 places already add up to more than half of the attraction expenses. Otherwise, museums here and there cost about $10 to $20 each. I spend most of my time in new cities by walking around for hours through the street to get a more authentic feel of the city from the locals' perspective, while eating and drinking. But of course, if you're into more touristy landmarks, you can easily get your hands on discounted pass like a city pass or a city tour. Overall, my 100 days of road trip across North America cost me about $10,000 minus some tax benefits, but could have easily been brought down to under $40 or $50 per day if needed. Now, the cheesy question to follow all of this is, so what are you waiting for, or how low can you go?